Math is a language, so it's no wonder that students who struggle with language-based learning challenges also have difficulty with math. Well, my guest today is Adrianne Meldrum. She's the CEO of Made for Math, an all-online multisensory math intervention service aimed at helping neurodiverse students thrive in their pursuit of mathematics. I'm so excited about our conversation today. Listen in.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hi, Adrianne. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Karen. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you here today to discuss math. I'm so excited.
It's so needed. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Your day's going well?
Yes. It's been full of meetings and whatnot, but
I know. It seems like people are really busy, especially with the transition back to in-person learning and teachers being able to sit and have their eyes on kids in person for, a longer period of time compared to last year. I think that they're getting a better handle on kind of areas of struggle and areas of stretch for students.
Yes, I would agree. We're finding the same thing. What's interesting is when parents apply, fill out the paperwork to come be here, it's fascinating to watch over time how their terminology is changing, how they describe what's happening. After a year of COVID learning, they're actually getting really adept at describing what they're seeing and realizing I can't help. This seems to be beyond my scope of how I can help. So I thought that was interesting. Before it used to just be, we need help. And now it's much more descriptive after having a year.
That's so interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's what happens when parents are kind of taking on the job of teacher's assistant at home, and supervising remote learning. They're really observing the process for their kids.
Yes. I think they're seeing up close, there's some holes there that probably shouldn't be there. Gosh, they should have probably known that, in first grade, and they're not doing that.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And don't you find that, I think with COVID, a lot of difficulties got attributed to COVID. It's they're probably behind because of the remote learning or because of COVID. But now that kids have been back in the classroom for a while now, we're better able to kind of distinguish between what might be, associated with or attributed to remote learning and what is really an underlying issue that needs to be addressed with a really good intervention.
Yes, absolutely. I think, COVID did play a part in it, but I do think the kids that were already maybe hanging on a little bit, but the schools necessarily weren't communicating that yet. They were doing their part, right? Doing the pull out, doing the extra support. But then COVID prevented that from happening. So they were probably teetering a little bit, and that COVID just exasperated everything for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, the episode before this one describes dyscalculia or math disorders. And I really wanted to spend some more time talking about interventions for kids who struggle with math.
Yes.
Because oftentimes it gets overlooked because we spend a lot of time talking about attention and reading and even writing, but math I feel like it doesn't get discussed enough. Because I think we often attribute difficulties with math with just not being good at math, which I think is a mistake. We don't do that with reading. We don't say, oh, I'm just not good at reading.
Yes,
but we do that with math, which is really interesting, the way we conceptualize struggles with math. But I would love to have this conversation with you. Obviously, we're having this conversation to really talk about, when you see kids who are struggling with math, what the intervention looks like. And are the interventions different for those who have a weakness in math and those who have a diagnosed math disorder?
Yeah. Oh, I think that's a great question. One thing that I want to mention too, a part of the challenge why, as a society, it's okay to be bad at math. Math is unique in that it's something that's usually just spoken at school. It's a language. It really is a whole nother way of communicating. that's really only taught at school. So it's difficult as a society to be able to recognize that. And as a parent, you would have to be very proactive at talking math at home. Some parents are better at that than others. And so we kind of get stuck in that trap. But to the point of your question, if you're just struggling a little bit, but you don't necessarily have a diagnosis or anything like that, my experience has been the methods that we use are appropriate for all students. They really are. They are just good teaching. They are solid teaching methods. So we use an approach that's called multisensory math. And you may have heard of multisensory reading approaches. You've probably seen an OG tutor. It's hands-on, it's auditory. It's got all the hallmarks of that. And so, but I also wanted to highlight quickly. Some parents get this confused. It's not a curriculum. What we do. It's not a program, and it's not mastery based like you would see maybe Mathnasium or Sylvan Learning Center doing. It's not that at all. It's an approach, and it dictates how we teach the student. So it's akin to what's called UDL, Universal Design for Learning. And UDL is fantastic. It's got some great hallmarks to it. But I don't believe there's a one-size-fits-all solution to teaching these students. There is no perfect curriculum or approach that I can use. Instead, this method allows me to create a way for us to tap into the student's strengths and use those to remediate or intervene and help with the weaknesses. So multisensory means that we're going to tap in with the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic tactile. So VAKT. Now, historically, that acronym has been tethered with learning styles, which the science on that is saying, well, there are no learning styles.
Right, absolutely.
So that's not, just to clarify, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying, oh, your child's just a visual learner. Oh, they're just kinesthetic. What we're doing by VAKT is we're increasing multi-access points to the curriculum that we're trying to teach. It makes it so that maybe this day, visually, that worked for the student, but another day it might be that auditorily the language was different enough, they understood it. And so it's just creating those different modalities, and when we kind of do them all together, it increases the access to the math learning. It's really effective. The other hallmark of multisensory math is a very prescriptive lesson plan. OG tutors do this too. Ours follows a really specific sequence. We're always starting with a warm-up, something to jog the memory, start accessing those parts of the brain that are in charge of math. And then we start leaning into what we worked on the other day. And then we start building towards this new concept through vocabulary and gross motor. And then we introduce that new concept, and it's all using that visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile approach. So it's really effective. And what we're finding is that students that are highly anxious, that have that math learning disability, when they start interacting with math in this capacity, for the first time ever, they're seeing, oh my goodness, turns out I'm not dumb. Turns out I can reason mathematically and that I get it. It's a really empowering experience.
And that is so important, because when students see themselves as being able to be successful at something, it just increases their motivation to work hard. Because so many of the students that I've seen and my colleagues have seen who struggle with math and think, I'm just not good at math, or I'm bad at math, it impacts their ability to want to do the math homework, because it's like, oh, I can't do this anyway. Because their mindset needs to shift because of all the difficulties that they've faced over time. And what you're describing is really an individualized approach. Like you mentioned, taking into consideration a child's strengths and using those strengths to help them compensate for areas of weakness that can be contributing to the difficulties with math.
Yes, absolutely. That is exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. And that's really important. And the other unique thing about our method is that our teachers are trained in how the brain learns. We study this. And so we know what parts of the working memory are going to need support and how we can increase memory. Like procedural memory is the part of the brain that helps with remembering how to ride a bike, right? It's something that we're doing over and over. And the reason why the brain can hang on to that even after you've ridden a bike in a decade is because it was procedural. You gross motor it. You you did it. And so I like to illustrate this one step further. When I got my very first job, I was washing cars. And I remember for months in my sleep, I kept washing cars and, I know how to do it just the right way. That's the kind of memory that this approach can tap into. We're doing things with our hands while we're talking about it, while we're speaking about it, to get into the brain in an easier, less friction way so that it's stored in a way that the brain can pull out, like riding a bike. So what's interesting, some of the results that we've seen students have is they get up to grade level, and then we find the parents will come back and report to us. What's fascinating about their state testing is they retained everything we taught them. But when the school takes over, they're not retaining the new information that they're getting. They might be able to do it, but they're not retaining it as much, which is really fascinating. So it tells you that this is an effective way of teaching. It's direct, it's systematic. We're not leading kids to guessing what the answer could be. We're showing them how to do this with their hands, with their drawings, and we eventually get to that abstract part that we all know really well.
Right, right. Because really what you're helping the brain do is to make more connections. You're connecting different areas of the brain while they're completing these tasks. So you're activating the auditory system, the visual system, those problem-solving systems at the same time, which just enhances learning.
Yes, yes, absolutely. We're showing them, how the whole works and breaking it down into parts, but then we're doing the reverse too. We're breaking it into parts and going to the whole so that they can see. And a lot of students that have dyslexia, they're gifted in thinking big picture. They're really good at that. So when they start hearing math concepts like this is why we're doing this and this is where it's taking us big picture, they go, oh, oh, okay, that makes sense. It gives it meaning, and if we can tie it to anything real world, that even enhances it even more. It's now math isn't something to be endured, it's something I can use.
Absolutely. And, we know that kids struggle with different aspects of math. For some kids, they just cannot get those math facts. And for other kids, it's the working memory issues that are really contributing to the struggle. Others, they get those math calculations. They can do them without any difficulty. They can even do them quickly. But then you put the same concept in a word problem and they have absolutely no idea if this is addition, subtraction, multiplication, what to do with that information. Does this approach work for all of those kids?
Yes. Yes, it does. It works really well. Like the word problems, it's such a great example. That's actually a huge weakness in math education, word problems. For the way they're written, the language that's chosen can make it so inaccessible. So the role of the teacher is really to be an interpreter of the math and help the students break down what's happening. Now, historically, teachers are usually doing find the keywords, match the operation, but the research indicates that that's actually not helpful. And yet it's something that as culturally in the school system, it's difficult to break. It can take, 15 plus years for the research to make it down into the classroom. And that's the one benefit to what we do is we're free of that slower pace. We can read the research, go and apply it. So the research that my team and I are working on implementing is a different framework for those word problems. It's teaching patterns of word problems because most of them fall into some general categories, which actually builds beautifully to algebra. Not to bore you all with the details of how to teach some word problems, but some of the more easy, simple ways that a parent could help with those word problems is take it one sentence at a time. You read the sentence, you cover up the whole problem, read the sentence, and visualize together what's happening. Johnny has 8 apples. Oh, what's this? Well, who's Johnny? What does Johnny look like? And you could scribble a stick figure and emphasize we're not trying to be Picasso here. It's a stick figure. It doesn't need, Johnny doesn't even need hair right now. So draw a picture of Johnny and draw his 8 apples. That could be the thing. And then you go to the next sentence and you draw more of the picture. And so the goal is to help them visualize, which a lot of our students, especially those with dyslexia, it's difficult to do that and process all the other pieces of math. But if we can break it down and scaffold it that way, by the time we get to the end of the problem, the very last thing before you reveal what they're asking, you could say, well, what do you think they're going to ask? Try to predict what they're going to ask. And then you finally reveal it. And usually the kids are correct. Sometimes they're not. And you can talk about why. Why was there a disconnect? And then solve the problem together. So the student is learning how to visualize what's happening instead of reading all of it, feeling overwhelmed, feeling confused by the language, and then trying to read it again. And now they're in this state of anxiety, which blocks all sorts of other things in their brain too.
Absolutely. And I love that you've mentioned dyslexia a couple times now, because oftentimes kids with dyslexia also have difficulties with math.
Yes.
And also kids with language disorders have a real struggle with those math word problems. And we know from the research that visualizing and verbalizing together really help with understanding, right?
Yes.
With comprehension, even comprehension of those math problems.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting of our students, probably a little over 60% of them have dyslexia. And unfortunately, here's what's frustrating is the parents just get past the point where, okay, reading's solid, and then
I
math
know
starts to
it.
become a problem. And it's like, shoot, I'm so sorry. Yes, it does have a role in it. Yeah, it does. But this multisensory method, it works for students with dyslexia. It works for kids with dyscalculia. And then it also just works for any student that doesn't learn in the normal way, the neurotypical way. They need completely outside of the box methods. And so that's what you're doing. It's diagnostic. We're looking at that information. So what you do, Karen, is fantastic. With the permission of the parents, if they share those neuropsych reports with us, we'll look at it and go, oh, look at this. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, so that means the student's going to need a near point reference, something close by to help support their memory so that they're not spending so much time trying to remember what 7 times 7 is. We can instead focus on learning this new topic. So those are kind of the hallmarks of what good multisensory math looks like.
Absolutely. And I just love that approach because I've seen it work in so many kids, and I've seen really the transformation for kids who've really struggled with math, disliked math. And then when they go through these really important and transformational interventions, that it just changes their outlook towards math. They see themselves as being able to do things, and that motivation just increases their willingness to try problems when they get more challenging, where in the past they may have said, oh, that's just too hard.
Yes.
I can't do that. Right.
Yes.
They get overwhelmed with just looking at the problem.
Yes. And the other fascinating thing that we're observing, and now this doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, right? As you know, all interventions take time. But what's fascinating is that once they've experienced learning that's wired for them, they start to get curious. Well, if I can do this math thing that was so scary, what else can I learn? And so we'll hear reports back from parents saying, I'm seeing them apply this outside of math or applying it in other subjects. They become even better students because now they walk around understanding how their brain works. A little bit of self-advocacy goes a long way. They realize oh, I need bigger font on my stuff, or I need that near point reference. I need this little piece of paper to help me remember how to do something. It's really empowering to experience instruction that helps you understand yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I'm thinking about parents who might be listening, or, even educators, tutors who might be working with kids. What are some tips for thriving in math for students, who might be struggling? Do you have any tips that you give? 'Cause I'm sure that there's homework that they do outside of your office as well,
Sure.
which
Yes.
obviously is just to kind of supplement the work that you're doing, the important intervention.
Yes. I'm smiling because I actually have my little near point reference
Oh,
for myself, so I don't forget to mention all the good ones. So these are things that anyone can do. You can do them at home, so it doesn't matter if you're the therapist or if you're the parent. So one huge thing you can do when you're talking to your child about math is you're going to clear as much emotion as you can from the experience. If your child is in hysteria and they're crying and sobbing about math, you've got to get that under control first. Because we know when the brain is learning, it's processing everything emotionally first. It's going in. First, you have to capture their attention, but then it's being processed emotionally. Is this a threat? and math is a threat right now. So we need to practice some mindfulness, get the breathing under control and relax. So when my son is like this, that's what we work on is we get focused, we breathe, we'll go for a walk and take a break because for whatever reason, we're upset right now. Which I know is frustrating when maybe they've been crying for an hour. It's not easy. This is a quick hack I'll share too. We have students that sometimes are so anxious they're throwing up. It's like completely overwhelming. So here's a quick hack for resetting your system. And an occupational therapist shared this with me. You get them in the shower and get the water to fall right here on top of their head. And just tell them, stand in the shower, stare at the water going down the drain. That's all I want you to do. And what's fascinating, this works really well for my son who's highly anxious. It helps him start regulating that breathing, helps him get into a better space. And now he can reset, he can focus. We can have a conversation. So that's like next level. But let's get the emotions under control. Then once you're back sitting together, I actually don't recommend sitting across from each other. You're going to sit shoulder to shoulder because especially if you're working with a middle schooler, the research is also showing us that they're terrible at reading facial expressions. So any kind of you raising your eyebrows because you can't remember how to do that. They're thinking, she's mad, she's angry, it's all my fault, I must be stupid. Again, we're going to keep that emotional regulation and control. So if you sit shoulder to shoulder, they can't see you raising your eyebrows and saying, I can't do this. So that's important. Then the next thing would be when you're speaking about the math, try to use clear language and slow down what you're speaking at. Speak slower so that your child can process what you're saying. And then another thing would be to create kind of a clutter-free space. So if they've got, let's say, a piece of homework and it has 20 problems on it, that, especially for a kid with ADHD, feels like death and it's overwhelming. And so you're going to want to cover up if you can, or even translate that problem for your child onto one piece of paper and let them do their work. Now, I know, we got to be judicious about our paper use, but in this case, it's not important. If you need to transfer one problem to a piece of paper, do it. The other hack I'll give you, some of the students struggle with dysgraphia or various issues. The alignment starts to shift. Flip the piece of paper 90 degrees so that you've got columns now of lines, and the students can write inside of those to help with their alignment. So that's another hack that you can try. The other thing you could talk to the teacher about, this in the moment might not work, but just asking for the homework in a larger font with more white space to write. Because as you know, some of them have huge handwriting. They can't fit it in. They can't even show what they're doing. So all of these things lower that anxiety and creates an environment where they can succeed. Like in our services, every student is experiencing one problem on the whiteboard at a time. We don't do more than that because we need to help them focus, number one, and give them plenty of work room.
Right. Those are great tips.
Yeah.
Those are really great tips.
I could keep going. I've got 10
those
more.
They're practical. They're things that parents can do now and educators can do now to kind of help facilitate this process.
Yes. And then if an educator's listening to me, there's research too about homework and its efficacy. I'm pleading with you to reduce how much homework. I understand your administrators want you to assign it. I would plead give less, just 5 problems, and a student doesn't need a repetition of 20. That's the other thing that's really interesting about a student with dyslexia is if it's taught in a way they understand, they do not need that high of repetition. It's like death by problems, it's like beating them over the head. So just reducing how many problems you assign is also extremely helpful. And parents, advocate for your child. Just reply back and say, the best we could do tonight was 5 problems.
Right. Absolutely. And that's particularly problematic with kids who have slow processing speed in addition to struggles with math, because it just takes them longer. So 30 minutes of homework takes them 90 minutes.
Yes.
And if they get the concept, then I agree with you. They shouldn't have to do 10 problems that are conceptually similar if they get
Yes,
it after two.
exactly. And the one last quick tip. I've done this before with my child. His processing speed was so fast, but his hands could not move fast enough to keep up with it. So I would become his scribe. He would tell me what he's thinking. I'd write it down, and even if I knew there was an error, I wouldn't say anything. I just write down what he said, and then he would turn it in. I think that's a great way to get around some of that resistance that might be setting in.
Absolutely. I love that last tip. A lot of students, we talked about this at the beginning, have kind of fallen behind during the pandemic. And, they just didn't acquire the skills during that remote learning environment. They really needed that one-on-one, in-person instruction in order to really understand math. Or do you have any specific recommendations for those kids where there's been, some loss as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would say it's smart to seek some outside help. Um, Now, that's not to promote myself. That is from experience. I have been in that boat. I have kids who I go and get help for, and that's strategic. In that kids behave very differently for someone else than they do for you. And I'm a big believer in reducing friction in the home as much as possible. So if you have the means, by all means, go get someone to be on your team and step in and help, so that you can have a more peaceful experience at home. That's also hugely helpful. And there's all sorts of options. You can ask the school if they have an after school program to get some tutoring. Something is better than nothing, even if it's small group. But I think getting some outside help is a fantastic step, especially because a recurring theme I hear from parents is they're seeing there's so many holes. They see it, but yet they feel overwhelmed trying to diagnose where to even start. Like, I don't even know. And so that is a fantastic thing to involve someone else. But if you lack that ability, the last tip I'll share is there's a company called Let's Go Learn. And Let's Go Learn makes online assessments. You could pay for an assessment. They're $20, $25. Have your child take them in increments of 15 minutes, which is counter to what the site tells you to do, but we don't care about speed. We care about finding the holes. So you could have them take it in 15-minute increments. When they're done, it generates a report and it tells you in double red arrows, start here. This is where you're going to start. So that way you can figure out how to help your child best move forward. But obviously, I'm a big fan of hiring help. But if you absolutely can't, that's a different way you could go about it if you're trying to DIY it.
And I have seen the benefits when kids get the intervention and the support that they need. And what I'm telling parents now is to not delay the intervention and not to delay asking for the support that you need.
Yes.
Because I think, enough time has passed now where we can't, blame things on the pandemic. And so, and even if they were behind as a result of the pandemic, they still need support, again, like you said, to fill the holes. And you also talked about parents advocating for their child. And I think that that's really important because, teachers will not know what students need oftentimes, particularly because they're not observing them do some of the work at home. They may have 30 kids in a class. Their eyes may not be on your child all the time. But a parent is sitting home and again, seeing their child take 90 minutes to do that 30-minute homework assignment. And so conveying that to teachers is so important. So they have an idea of kind of what the struggle is. And it opens up the doors to getting the support your child needs, whether that be a school-based support, a recommendation or referral for an assessment, or recommendations to get support from someone who does a multimodal approach to intervention like you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And once they get those diagnoses, sometimes it's plural. I'm sure you see that. A common question we'll get is, well, we just got the dyslexia diagnosis and a math learning disability. We're going to do them both. Like sometimes parents are so excited to hear what the issue is. They want to fix it all right now. My advice would be start with the reading, actually. Math, we can catch you up at any point. It's different. Whereas they're going to need that reading skill to do well in math. So focus on that. If you have to pick either or, then I would do that. Also, we don't want to overwhelm and burn this child out.
I love that you said that, because I completely agree. And I've seen parents feel overwhelmed because, they get a dyslexia and a dyscalculia, and they want to do everything, but not only are they overwhelmed, the child will be overwhelmed. So I completely agree with starting with reading, because it's going to help them with math once you get them more efficient with reading and get that reading fluency up to speed and comprehension as well, right?
Yes, so good.
Adrianne, this has been such a great conversation. And one of the things I love that you talked about was really that mental health piece, right? Because I think that oftentimes the focus is on the academics. They're struggling with math. How can we help them get up to speed with math? Or with reading? How can we help them get up to speed with reading? But what you've described is we really have to pay attention to their emotional state when they're struggling, and to address that first, because it's really hard to problem solve and to remember what you've been taught as an approach to math when you are dysregulated emotionally, when you are in the midst of a meltdown. That is not the time to say, remember that approach that Adrianne taught you, when they're melting down. Yes, we get them in the shower, we practice some mindfulness, some breathing, and then we have the conversation. So I love that you talked about that, because I think that's really important to be mindful of, a child's state of mind when they're struggling, and to address that first, because oftentimes they're overwhelmed, they're anxious. Sometimes they just need a feeling of safety, and they need to connect with a parent. Math is not important at this exact moment. We will get to it. We don't have to get to it now, but let me pay attention to what it is that you need right now as my child. And that may mean a walk. That may mean let's go shoot some baskets. That may mean let's get you in the shower, and then we'll revisit it. But again, we don't want them to avoid it altogether, but we don't have to do it right now. So I love that you talked about that, because I think it's so important.
I think so too. And sadly, we just try to strong arm way too much. We are emotional beings first before we're learning people. So, embrace that you are allowed to feel angry and upset about this math right now, and do something about it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really love this discussion, and I just think it's going to help a lot of parents. It's going to help a lot of educators and other people who work with kids who struggle. So thank you so much for being here. What is the best way for listeners to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the easiest way is just to head to our website, madeformath.com, and it's FOR, madeformath.com. That's the easiest way. It connects to all of our social media. We have a really active YouTube channel, actually. If you want some videos to explain different concepts to your child in a way that's, again, using clear language. We actually speak slower, the clutter-free space. It's all those things. We're slowly building up our library over there to help with that homework crunch, so you can show your child something that might actually be helpful.
Excellent. And I will make sure to put the website link and the link to the YouTube videos in the show notes for this episode.
Thank you so much.
Adrianne is one of our Child Nexus professional members. If you are an allied professional who works with children and adolescents who think or learn differently, we would love to have you as a member of this amazing community. Reach out to me at drkiwilson@childnexus.com, and we can chat about it. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.